everyone. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. And I'm excited to kind of dig back into my roots a little bit. We're going into the world of EHR documentation workstations. As someone who implemented hundreds of them at my organization, I'm excited to see how it's evolved over time. And we have two special guests. First, we have Kevin Bridges, who's VP of Marketing and Business Development at Enovate Medical. And we also have Marc LaFleur, VP of New Customer Development at Innovate Medical. Welcome, Marc. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so excited to dive into this. Like I said, I have all the scars from implementing workstations in healthcare, but certainly I love to see how it continues to evolve. But before we dive into that world, Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Innovate Medical?
Sure, John. So Kevin Bridges, VP of Marketing Business Development. I've actually been with the company 18 years this month, so various positions within the company. But if you look at our history, about 25 years of building what we like to call EHR workstations. Those may be fixed, may be mobile. There's a place for both. We've really focused on the mobile side of things because there's so many challenges there. If you look at our history, yes, there's ergonomics. Yes, there's mobility. Yes, we need to accommodate multiple desktop computing peripherals. But we really focused on power and how do we get battery power to those peripherals? How do we manage that for nursing? How do we make it easy for them? Is it corded? Is it cordless? We go back about 10 years. We actually developed Mobius Power, which was the industry's first true cordless swappable battery pack technology. So nurses did not have to park, plug, and wait for them to recharge. The other things we saw in the industry were just remote visibility. There's no visibility. We have customers that don't even know how many they have when we talk about mobile EHR workstations. Typically an expensive capital asset when you load it up with all the computing devices and hardware. Of course, you spent millions on an EHR, so it's critical that you know where those assets are and how they're being used. So we actually developed a asset management platform. We call it Rhythm, so that we have that remote visibility. We know how many you have, but more importantly, where they are, where they should be versus where they are, if they've been abandoned and not being used, if they need repairs and they just haven't been reported. And evolved into the services on the deployment side. We do what we call a clinical device assessment to make sure that we're picking the right solutions for the various clinical specialties, and actually come back periodically, typically on a quarterly basis, and review that data to make sure that not only you're using those assets optimally, but making sure that they're available and in the right place in good working order for your clinicians to improve that clinical productivity. So it's been an evolution, but we've really evolved to a technology and services company more so than just a pure products company.
Yeah, great, Kevin. Anything you'd add, Marc, and tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, thanks for having me again, John. I am Marc LaFleur. I've been with Enovate Medical for about 13 years and multiple parts of the country and multiple roles within the organization. And I've truly been blessed to, during my time here, to kind of see really the full spectrum evolution of mobile computing. It's been quite a journey that Enovate Medical's been on, but really the industry as well. And I think it's been a roller coaster ride, I think, for health hospital systems through mergers and acquisitions and through consolidations and through the Epics and the Cerners of the world really kind of taking over the EHR space. And through all that has been really a constant evolution of mobile carts or mobile workstations, as we call them. So really early on here in our discussion, I think it's very important for your audience to understand, while the mobile workstation, the mobile cart might not be the most sophisticated piece of technology out there. It's not a piece of life-saving equipment. It is equipment that is absolutely required and demanded and needed constantly for doctors and for nurses and techs and phlebotomists and respiratory therapists and so forth. And I think one thing we saw during the COVID pandemic through hospitals, I think more than ever did marketing, and they had to have awareness and communication to their customer base, more than I'd ever seen in my entire tenure in healthcare, how hospitals communicated to their community about the updates with COVID. And in the background was always a couple things. It was the doctor, the nurse, the life-saving equipment in the ICU, and then there was always a mobile cart there next to them. And that was the one thing I think that really put it in the forefront. So I think even over the last 18 months, we have seen hospitals kind of, in some ways, the hospitals that were behind the 8 ball and thinking that it was just a piece of furniture or a piece of metal with wheels on it have really changed their thinking quite a bit, and understanding that these mobile workstations are critical to patient care, and they need to be available all the time. And I think what happened during the pandemic was that, point of care documentation happened pretty much anywhere and everywhere within that hospital, and sometimes even outside of the hospital in a COVID tent or in a pop-up hospital somewhere. So I think that, it's going to be exciting today for your audience and for us to all talk about that evolution a little bit, about the mobile cart.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that from a COVID perspective. I imagine you heard stories and saw people that had maybe a fixed workstation in the room and they weren't allowed in the room, right? I mean, it feels like there must have been, it's interesting because I hadn't heard of any myself, but that, understanding where the workstation is and having it available. You said it's not a life-saving device, but my experience with nurses and doctors is it saves their life from a work perspective.
Yes,
from
yes,
a work
very much.
satisfaction perspective, right? And so if they don't have access, they can't do the work, much like when we have EHR downtime. They can't see the patient often, they have to go to backup procedures, et cetera, cancel appointments. So it is interesting. Did you hear some examples where they had to pivot and buy more carts to make it more mobile because they had fixed workstations in the rooms, or how did they manage that? Do you have any stories about that?
It really was chaos early on, and I'm up here in the Northeast, and where a lot of the early outbreaks were in the Northeast region. I think there was a lot of trial by error for a lot of health systems, and a lot of health systems overbought, just thinking that this thing would have gone on forever. And whether it was organizations that already had a mobile strategy or if they had a fixed strategy, there was all of a sudden now a need not so much overhaul what they have, but added to it. So we had a lot of hospital systems buy a lot of equipment from us. And it wasn't just inpatient for documentation. There's telehealth boom as well. Sure. For communication to families, keeping that, patient experience still going, because every patient was in a delicate, a state of health. There were just patients that had to be at the hospital and were recovering. So we had heavy demands placed on Enovate Medical for not just the mobile workstations for clinical documentation and nursing and doctors, but for also telehealth as well. So the demand was very much there on both sides of the coin, whether they had a fixed strategy or mobile strategy or even a hybrid one.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's shift back to kind of where we're headed and what should people know about what's available. Because I think that's the, challenging thing is that many people have bought it and then they don't buy for 3 years. So they don't realize the evolution that happens, or 3 years is maybe being generous. Some are 5. It'd be interesting to hear your stories. They should do it every 3 years. There's my advice as a tech guy. But what is the spectrum of EHR document workstations look like today? Because I think people simplify it and say, oh, we have a fixed one and we have a mobile one. But it feels like you all offer a much bigger spectrum of options. Kevin, maybe could you chime in on that? What options are really available for hospitals and health systems?
Sure, John. So if at the core, we have 4 different product lines of fixed and 4 different product lines of mobile. But if you start looking at the different configurations, there are hundreds. 300, 400, 500 different configurations you can build. As I said earlier, the clinical device assessment is key, because let's go to ER. So ERs, patient registration, patient access. They may need a e-signature pad. They may need to scan a credit card. They may need to actually swipe a card and collect fees in the ER. You go to med surge, they may be delivering meds. They may just have a simple barcode scanner, PC monitor, but we've got to be cognizant of the workflow in each department and tailor that to each workflow. We try to standardize as much as possible, but typically the configurations is typically a standard mobile and or fixed model. And then we configure to each of the workflows. As far as our products, we can scale the gamut from simple non-powered to corded power, traditional corded power. We can go cordless power for places like ER. I was in an ER not long ago that had 30 overflow beds. So you can't use a fixed mount there, and you never know when you're going to need those 30 beds. So you provide that flexibility. We've even developed the ability to go corded or cordless depending on what the demands are throughout the day or throughout the month or year, and reallocate, as Mark said earlier, with the COVID world. We have customers that have deployed in mass vaccination clinics and then pull back and disperse the mobile platform in clinics, or even brought it into the acute care hospital. But there's a broad spectrum, and we have customers that have a tendency to just want to try to buy from a lineup. But if we can just get engaged, Mark and I and our team of some 15 people have been through hundreds of deployments. So we're not nurses, we're not IT professionals, but we do know what it takes to make a successful go live or a refresh of fixed and mobile EHR workstations. So we can help you.
Yeah. So you highlighted a number of things. I think mobile versus fixed, right? There's the power, does the power need to be mobile, plugged, et cetera? The peripherals obviously make a big difference, it sounds like. Are those kind of the three categories, Mark, or is there anything else you'd add? And, I'd love to hear what are some of the most popular. Kevin covered a few in the ED and in different areas. Are there other that are like, these are the most popular for our ambulatory clinics versus, the lab prefers these? Are there some of those, Mark, you'd add?
John, I can't tell you how many times I'm asked that question
Yeah.
when I'm forward-facing customers and they come to Innovate for advice and say, what would you recommend for the ICU?
Uh-huh.
And it's crazy. There is no set answer. There really isn't. And I wish there was, because it would make all of our jobs much easier.
You'd be out of a job.
Yeah, but exactly. We'd be somewhat out of a job, or we'd still be employed and make our lives much easier. And the reason there is not just a set answer for you is you got to look at kind of the landscape of our country. You have the Northeast region, which is hundreds of years old, and buildings were built 125 years ago that are still operable in use. They have infrastructure restrictions. They have different type of smaller patient rooms, smaller med rooms. Okay. Sometimes, I've been in hospitals in Los Angeles where there's quad occupancy, 4 patients to 1 room. Wow. And I would love to say, an ICU means this, an ED means this, phlebotomist means this. It is so crucial, as Kevin has brought up a couple times, that when we engage with our customers to do a true what we call a clinical device assessment, or for our audiences, layman's terms, is really a gap analysis in some way to see what's working today, what that existing workflow looks like versus what the proposed new workflow looks like. And a big mistake hospitals made over the years is that they deployed a one-size-fit-all strategy to their organization. Said, well, we have 400 carts, and pretty much outside of a couple of minor changes, they're all going to be the same. And that just didn't work. It just did not work. So hospitals today are really, clamoring for a much more advisory approach to it, to say, what can we do better? Where can we become more efficient? Where can we become more optimal within our workflows, not just in nursing, but who's supporting that group? Well, it's that IT group, right? The IT group has to go out and support thousands of different devices throughout the enterprise. Forget about mobile carts for a second. They're supporting printers, scanners, Citrix farms, you name it. They're supporting absolutely everything out there. how can we streamline that process again for IT and for clinical? So to answer your question, long story short, no, there's no simple answer. We don't see a one size fits all strategy throughout any healthcare system that we work with.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I think there's so many opportunities and options that are available today, and it probably is influenced by how electronic they've gone as well, right? They don't need the signature pad if they haven't implemented e-signature, right? So I imagine that influences the decision. But I'd love to hear, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it feels like mobility has become more and more important. Do you see that as well? Or are you still, is it still tons of fixed workstations and some targeted mobile workstations?
Yeah, it's definitely every conversation we have with IT and clinical, mobility is brought up, and it's really, really important for us to define what that means in healthcare, because it's a very broad term today.
Right.
And what we're trying to achieve mobility at the point of care, whether that's different types of mobile applications that are being used, physicians with BYOD, telehealth technology. But if we're focusing solely first on nursing, what does that mobility mean? Well, we know nurses are constantly moving the entire shift. And if we're talking about just in the mobile workstation space today, that means we have to, and we are responsible to provide nursing a technology that promotes mobility for them. And I think what we mean by promoting mobility, it means this is a device that is built for my workflow. Going back to what we discussed about a couple minutes ago, was that this configuration suits our workflow. It is at the right size for what we need. And based off our workflow demands, okay, and based off what that need looks like, medical, surgical, highly mobile, respiratory therapy, phlebotomy, ED, highly mobile departments. There are many ICUs I've been in that nurses tend to be a little bit more mobile. Some have a much more of a 1-to-1, 1-to-2 ratio. And they're not as mobile in certain infrastructure in certain cities, that they sit there with their patient, or maybe there's an alcove set up right outside of the two rooms there that they can monitor their patient remotely from an alcove. Maybe it's an isolation room and they're pretty much in that room almost the entire day with that patient. So yes, we are very much heavily focused on different levels of mobility. We like to focus on low mobility areas and what might just be a corded battery solution that is not moved very often. We want to focus on those moderate areas, and those moderates have some cross-pollination between them. It could be, again, very well an ICU department in one city, in one hospital, that they need a little bit more mobility. In other areas, they might not need it. So we call that more of a moderate mobility. And then there's those very high mobility areas that I referenced that would very much benefit from a swappable battery technology, because they don't have time to plug in the cart. They're constantly on the go. They're taking care of multiple patients at one time. And then again, going back to what we discussed, those older hospitals that just don't have the available outlets in the hallway space. Yeah, and they're clamoring, because keep in mind, everybody, they're not just plugging in our mobile carts. They're plugging in vital signs machines and a bunch of other equipment as well. So that's why we need to look at it holistically at every hospital we go to and help them define what that mobility means, not with just our equipment, but in conjunction with other equipment they're using as well.
Yeah, and I'd say related to this, the two biggest things I hear about this, and it's true with workstations in general to some extent, not necessarily mobile ones, but one is lugging it around, right? I'd love to hear your thoughts on, pulling that cart around and, those complaints. And the second is just having access to the workstation. Those are probably the two biggest things that I hear from people. The lugging around, I think, has been addressed to some extent, but, having access to it, or a nurse owning that workstation because she's the senior one. What are some thoughts on how you overcome those challenges and how you manage it properly? Because I think mobility is great, but it also makes both of those a challenge, moving it around, and also where is it so I can actually use it.
So I can take on the mobility side, there are things we can do from the structural components. Obviously, you've got the durability to. People don't realize how important it is that, especially in an ER, that our equipment is durable. It's going to get hit with beds. You're going to run into it with x-ray machines and different things as they go in and out of the room. But some things that we have done, historically, people wanted to put a bigger battery. So what we did is we focused on being much more efficient from the battery, pulling energy from the battery to the multiple peripherals. We're seeing, Mark had a customer that had 6 different powered peripherals on one platform. So it's more of the Tesla or the Prius model where we've designed the EcoFlex power management system, which is 3 pounds versus the traditional 16 pounds for that power supply. We're able to move it up off the floor, makes it more dependable, more balanced. We can use a smaller, denser energy battery pack to go from, say, 13, 14 pounds to 5 pounds. But availability, as you mentioned, is key too. And that's where the Rhythm mobile asset management platform comes into play. Each of our devices has an embedded IoT, so we can connect to the cloud, so you have that remote visibility. But it's showing us not just location, but something we call a drift report. It's a ER, but it's in med-surg. Well, why are they in med-surg? Do they need to go back to ER? Do we need to reallocate them to med-surg? In that EcoFlex, we actually have a device that we can detect movement, and we can detect whether it's powering a PC. So from that, we can extrapolate whether it's actually being utilized, meaning it's being used to power a PC, and whether it's moving or not. From there, we can look at what we call abandon reports. I've got devices that haven't moved in 14 days. Why? Are they just missing? Are they in a closet? Are they in a storage room? Do they need repair? Do I have a surplus in this department? So before I go out and buy 10 new units, do I have 10, 15, 20 in my hospital that can be reallocated? And then lastly, we can actually take those measurements and look at peak usage. If you assign them by department, let's say that you have 18 in med-surg on 4th floor west wing. Well, we can see from the movement data that 9 a.m. Is a med pass, and we're using a max of 12. So why do I have 18? Can I use 6 somewhere else? Or maybe I don't have enough in a certain area. So as Mark said earlier, we're using that data from that platform to understand how to right size, reallocate, and not only optimize the capital assets, which also include the PCs, the monitors, the software, but also make sure it's available for nursing. It needs to be where they need it, when they need it. And then with those insights, we know whether it's fully functional or someone just failed to submit a service request. We can see that virtually.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, we apply analytics to healthcare in so many different ways. And I love how every single piece of technology in healthcare also applies analytics. I mean, what a great use for it. And I think that is one of the challenges that many healthcare organizations face, is just managing them all. And managing, what did they implement previously? What's new? What do they need? What's being used? How has that evolved? And I think that's one area. So, it's interesting to hear about the analytics platform. But I think the other question that a lot of CIOs are asking is, should we be in the desktop business at all? Right? Like, we did this with the data center as well. Should they be in the data center business at all, or should it all be in the cloud? Right? And what are you seeing in that regard as far as healthcare organizations really wanting, because you have a full service option and managed option, right? Managed services, like every piece of IT has gone this direction. What are you seeing? Are people moving more towards that managed service option? Are they still wanting to buy the devices and own the devices? And kind of what's been the evolution there? Kevin, maybe you want to start then, Mark?
So I'll let Mark add to this, but yes, we are seeing more and more that there's so much to do. The IT department's burdened with many, many things. If you look at a hospital, almost everything is networked today, from even the beds are networked, believe it or not. So all that rides on their network. Somebody's got to maintain that. So we're seeing a push toward outsourcing vendor managed equipment, as you just mentioned, John, managed services, and we can do that. We have a national team but we're really leveraging the analytics to know what to do and when to do it. We've also implemented the uptime service program. I'll let Mark talk about that. And what we've seen recently is a shift toward not buying the equipment, but also a subscription model, what we call clinical workstations as a service. If we're providing the physical platform, the technology to manage it, and the labor to do any type of asset management, lifecycle management, or even just do the repairs, then we can bundle that into a service. So Mark, do you want to add to the Uptime Ready Replacement Program or Clinical Workstations as a Service?
Yeah, for sure, Kevin. And I think it's something really interesting, John, that's coming out further now is hospitals are, especially the IT departments are asked to do more with less all the time. And I don't think that's going away. I just don't. I don't think IT budgets are exponentially expanding and you're hiring 30 more people. It's just whether that's a talent pool grab challenge or, it's just is the nature of the beast in healthcare. IT is asked constantly to do more with less. And COVID, while hospitals are getting back to being back in the hospital setting live, I think there's always going to be a period of time now where hospitals are looking at it and say, we can actually do more remotely. Maybe every day I don't have to be on the patient floor, or every day I don't even have to be at my cubicle. I could do some work from home as well. So going back to the analytics part, real-time visibility part, Rhythm's going to add another piece to that. But there's such a desire and a need now to ensure that these devices, because we understand now more than ever how important they are, is that they're always available. So as Kevin had mentioned, our uptime service program kind of reframes the discussion for IT and how they want to manage mobile workstations now, or get out of the business of managing. And I think that's going important to that shared services side is, hey, listen, you have a pretty significant capital asset in the organization with all your mobile carts that you have. And you are also given 30, 40, 50 projects at one time to manage. And you have to allocate those projects throughout a group that is not expanding, and your budget's not really expanding either. And that's where, luckily an organization like Innovate has been thinking about this for years now, knowing that it's on that trajectory, that IT is going to be asked to do more with less. And so in doing that, our uptime service program is built out to where we can handle all the service for the organization for either a 4 or 6 year window. We are providing ready replacements, or loaners, as we call them, to the hospital. So when a mobile cart goes down, in which it will, because we all know it's technology and nurses are using these things 24 hours a day, instead of pushing that workstation aside and waiting for a certified Enovate technician to come out on site, we are providing loaners to you. So when a cart goes down, IT's only responsibility at that point is to take the ready replacement that is set up in the IT bullpen up to the 5th floor of nursing, hand it to the nurse, take the cart that's down, put it back in the bullpen. Now we can actually even see that that's happening through our Rhythm Fleet Management software. So that shared services component, we're actually reaching out to the hospital saying, hey, we noticed one of our ready replacements was just brought up to the 5th floor about 2 hours ago. Do we need to schedule a time for a technician to come out? So now we are optimizing it for IT, saying our downtime with our mobile carts now has gone from maybe 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, depending when a technician can come out, to maybe 30 minutes or less. And that's pretty crucial. Now, a couple times we referenced the utilization of the workstations with the nursing and how often they're using them. A big, aha moment, I think, for IT leadership over the years is we can't just expect or hope and cross our fingers that these workstations are going to make it through their entire warranty period. Now, we see warranty periods out there being 3 years. I love the fact you said 3 years earlier. I wish that was the case. We know it's not. Hospitals are going to stretch their budgets as long as they can. Our equipment's warranted 6 years out of the box, electrical, structural, and mechanical. So we're already telling the customer, we're guaranteeing you that throughout this entire warranty period, you're going to have workstations that are covered by Innovate. We're going to cover the service for you as well throughout that 6 year window. But we're also going to ensure that these workstations run optimally. We can see it through Rhythm, of course, but we're going to come out and do what we call routine maintenance. And for your audience's layman terms, again, a PM is really what is a quote unquote tune up on those carts at 24 months and 48 months as well. So we're putting our money where our mouth is in a lot of ways. We're telling you, hey, not only are we giving you a strong warranty, we're going to also support that on the back end as well. And it's very easy for a customer to say, hey, we'll give you a 10-year warranty. Sure, no problem. But then what? And how do we support that in 10 years? And what's the SLA? And what's the parts availability? Because things change in healthcare so quickly. There's so much obsolescence in healthcare. When you wake up the next morning, things have changed quickly. So that's kind of where we stand with everything, is that we're going to sit there and give you a great warranty, but also have a complete support program in conjunction with the IT group.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're hitting on the point that's so important for a healthcare organization, and that is having the workstation available. It just feels like to me, I mean, I think you kind of mentioned this before, Mark, that, you know, the impact of the workstation not being available is going to impact things like clinician efficiency or even clinician burnout, which is a hot topic for all of us, right? I mean, who wants to be the nurse that gets to the workstation and can't access what they need to access because the power isn't there, or whatever it might be, right? And maybe, you know, I'd love to hear if there's other things you can do with a workstation setup to deal with that efficiency and those burnout problems. And I guess it's fascinating too, because when the nurse goes to it, they're probably going to say, I can't get into Epic, or I can't get into Cerner, right? When in fact, it had nothing to do with Epic and Cerner, but, you know, that's their, you know, unfortunately, the whipping boy sometimes. So yeah, I'd love to hear any thoughts, Mark. Maybe you could start on, you know, how does that workstation setup and reliability impact efficiency and burnout?
Yeah, it's a great point. And the burnout, I think, piece of it is more than just the battery and the power system that weighs the cart down, right?
Yeah.
You then need to look at, you know, why have hospital systems migrated to a single sign-on and provided device over the years? Well, it's to drive efficiency, right? It's going to reduce those logins for the nursing staff. And now it's that, you know, there's 60-70% of the hospitals we work with probably have that integrated. The other 30% are hitting up their board of directors for more money to get that done. But we know the cost to get that done is not short money. So where I think we're at right now is saying, okay, well, we know where healthcare has been going with and providing single sign-on. We can do that integration on our workstations to where they simply tap into the Epic system, to the PC. It will log them into our workstation as well through our Envoy intelligent workstation that we have available. I think another big piece of it, especially in certain sectors of the country, we see less of this out west, much more in other parts of the country because of the smaller med rooms, is having medication cart, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9 bins on the drawer. Well, all of a sudden, how are we managing that? I mean, that's another thing over the years I think a lot of people have lost track of, is saying we have 5,000 nurses at a very big, large health system somewhere. And we have 5,000 nurses that are going to use a variety of different workstations, but we have 7 total pins, 1 for each floor. And they're entering the carts 1, 2, 3, 4. So trying to optimize that and make that a more efficient for nursing, that when they log in, their name is on the workstation, it is assigned to them. They are protected by their group as well. So should a medication go missing, we're not in the business of tracking that medication, but we can tell who's entering those drawers. We can tell, you know, reduce that burden and that anxiety for nursing in a lot of ways. So IT is able to even track that through rhythm fleet management as well. So there's a lot of different things we're doing to drive efficiency and optimization for nursing and to reduce that fatigue. And Kevin and I have a discussion all the time about also reducing anxiety for nursing, because there's so much fatigue out there. There's alarm fatigue. There's, work rapport fatigue, staffing fatigue. There's a nursing shortage still. There's so many different fatigues that we could, then outline and say, okay, let's talk about all different types of nursing fatigue. Now, hardware will certainly fall underneath that. So we're trying to do things differently than just say, yeah, we can drive a solution for you that's lightweight, easy to maneuver and drive mobility, reduce fatigue. But we're also trying to simplify technology at the point of care as well, similar to what nursing's doing today in their personal lives. Everything's wireless for them. Their phones, single, you use their laptop at home's keychain through their Apple MacBook Air or their Dell laptop that's just logging them in right away, right? So that reduces fatigue in their day-to-day life. We're trying to drive that to the clinical space too.
Awesome. Well, you bring up an interesting point, and I think this is a good way to wrap up our conversation today. But I want to talk about what is the future of the workstation? What does it look like? And you know, I'd push also and just ask, is the future more mobile and voice, right? You know, they all have a mobile device now, sometimes multiple mobile devices. Is that the future versus the workstation? Or, you know, and then also, where do you see the workstation going if you think it's still going to be an important differentiated solution to the mobile device? Mark, you want to start, and then Kevin?
Yeah, I would love to. It's interesting. Kevin and I have both been around a long time, and we've pretty much almost seen and heard it all. But we're both learners, and we see, you know, we want to get educated and taught by our customers. So we're never going to sit here and going to pretend like we know exactly what that future looks like. But you could go back and find a healthcare IT article from 11 years ago, and it talks about the hospital room of the future, right?
Yeah. Well, the
until
iPhone just came out and said, "Oh, the iPhone's going to replace everything," right? I'm sure
yeah,
there's that article out there too, right?
yes, absolutely. And until every hospital system has a new hospital and they can build it with an architect and a general contractor and a design build firm to design exactly what they want, you know, you're not getting rid of a mobile workstation. But it's interesting, John. I have had multiple discussions even over the past 2 weeks, speaking with hospital systems that were mobile, went to bedside documentation with a fixed solution, and now are taking that out and going back to mobile.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons, it's really interesting. So before we talk a little bit about what that future looks like, let's talk a little bit about the present and how it then impacts the future. And why are they doing that? Well, their hospitals are now learning, well, we have put a computer in every room. We have maybe a couple spare wows as backups, but we're realizing we're only at about 80 to 90% census. And let's say that's an optimal number for them. We have assets in maybe 10, 20% of our hospital that are heavily underutilized. We've put an $800 barcode scanner in the room. We have put a $200 monitor. We have put a $700 PC. We have also put Zebra printers in every room. And now we have that in every room, but we're not maximizing that asset. So hospitals are starting to revisit this a little bit and go, well, we've actually spent more money on putting a computer at the bedside, at every bedside room, than we would if we outfitted it with 100 wows versus maybe, you know, a 400 bed hospital with a computer in every room. Another conversation we have with nursing is a lot of the nurses now that hated mobile carts many years ago because they didn't function the way a nurse operated, right? They were too heavy, too bulky. They had a vision of computer at the bedside. Now they get in there, they're doing their barcode scanning, they're doing their documentation. And what happens? A lot of times nursing will say, well, we want more engagement for our nurses with our patients. But it does in some ways, and I hate to use the word, but it does in some way trap them at the bedside, because what do they have in a medical surgical department? They have 4, 5, maybe 6 other patients they need to attend to. So nurses, in conjunction with the other equipment they're using, are becoming more mobile. So we're actually starting to see an old is new again philosophy that, all right, now organizations like Enovate have developed a better mobile strategy, a better mobile computing solution that we're not afraid to go back to mobile now. So it's kind of changing. So what does the future look like? I think, John, your guess is as good as mine. We could have had this conversation 10 years ago, and I heard from people 10 years ago that said wows will be gone in 5 years. They will not have a wows in hospitals. There's CIOs I worked with 6 years ago that said, oh yeah, this is our last purchase of wows and we'll be gone because everything's going to be tablet based. Well, there's still inherent challenges with a tablet based system. Sure. And with the average age of nursing still being in their 50s, with as much care planning and assessments that needs to be done, no matter what Meditech Expanse has or Epic Rover or any other application, there's still a challenge there where a nurse or a doctor still is looking for a standard mobile computing solution or standard keyboard feel. So maybe 20, 30 years from now, there is no more mobile carts, but until then, we'll still be in business.
Kevin, what would you add?
So a couple of things. So yes, we've nanotechnology. We can get the computing power, in the palm of your hand. But what's not going to change is the user input devices, or the human fingers. If you're going to admit a patient, you probably want a full-size keyboard. I tried to do a clinical device assessment the other day with an iPad, and I finally just broke out my laptop and started typing because I was faster. The touch display, if we go to an Epic hospital especially, they're asking for a 24-inch display. I haven't seen a tablet or a laptop with a 24-inch display, and they want to get multiple data sets or patient data sets on a screen simultaneously for physicians and nurses. So you have that challenge. And the other thing is, one of the reasons why our iPhones and Androids are so popular, it's the theory of jobs to be done. What we're seeing is we are powering multiple devices. So not only do we have that keyboard, mouse, PC, the processor, that 24-inch display, now we've got a barcode scanner, now we've got a specimen collection printer. So, and multiple other devices from that I talked about earlier. So think of the carpenter and the tool belt. So if we can put multiple devices on one platform to do multiple different things, and if we can go mobile and go nurse-centric versus room-centric, in a place where there's a 1-to-1 nurse-to-patient ratio, you probably don't gain. But if you go to med-surg where there's a 1-to-4 or 1-to-6 ratio, and you have that mobile platform with multiple devices, then you could go 6 units versus 24 units. So now by a factor of 4, you've cut down the number of devices, scanners, printers, PCs, monitors, keyboards, mice, badge reader that you have to not only purchase, but maintain. And your IT staff's already burdened with multiple things. So that's where, yes, there is a place for handheld devices for documentation or even scanning meds, but there will always be a place for WOWs in the near future, at least.
Yeah. Well, this was a lot of fun. This was an extremely nerdy conversation. And at Healthcare IT Today, we consider that a compliment. So thanks so much for sharing your insights and perspectives. And thanks everyone for watching. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Mark.
Appreciate you having us.